Rob Reno here with Visionary Family Ministries. I want to welcome a very special guest today to Family Vision. His name is Dr. Ben Rall, coming to us from Florida. Ben, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Looking forward to this for sure.
Ben, you are the author of the book Designed to Heal, the host of the Designed to Heal podcast, and we first got connected a couple of different ways. One is Amy and I were at the Wind-Shaped Marriage Retreat with your friend Jeff, and he told us all about you. But then we have a very close friend here in Wheaton, Dr. Mark Myers and his family, and he, like you, is a chiropractor. And I know that he has been connected with you. So through Jeff and through Mark, you and I became friends.
Yes. And then I learned about your work, and I mean, it actually ended up being kind of intense because I read your books, and I'm being a father. I have two children in their teenage years, and just come from some different family dynamics. And especially even during that COVID, it was kind of the COVID years, right? And so there was a lot going on. And you were a really big blessing to me just personally through reading your books. And then we've even had you and your wife on our podcast a couple of times. And so very thankful and looking forward to discuss our discussion today.
I love it. Well, Ben, give a quick introduction, your
Yeah.
family, your practice, and then I've got a lot of things I want to talk to you about.
Yep. So chiropractor for 20 years, just had my 20th year, originally from South Dakota. I've got two kiddos, Jack and Grace. They are 17. My daughter's a senior this year. We're a homeschool family. My son is a freshman or 15. When you're homeschool, sometimes you don't delineate the classes as much, but he's 15. And then my wife, Megan, she's an attorney by trade. She's stayed home these last years as educating at home with the kiddos. Practice in Orlando, Florida now as a chiropractor, seeing patients for a long time. Consider this my ministry. It really is what I feel like I'm called to do when we talk about health and healing. And you're a person of faith. It's pretty aligned. So that's what I do.
Well, you're a really out of the box guy. You homeschool, you're a chiropractor. Like, you just won't fit in any of the normal boxes, will you?
My personality style, my background even as a boxer, I don't mind the fight. I don't mind the battle. So I'm built for this. So it's okay with me.
Well, I wanted to have you on Family Vision because we have a heart to help families be healthy, right? At
Mm.
Visionary Family Ministries, we really focus on spiritual health, relational health, and you focus on some of those things too, but also physical health. And I listened to your podcast, the Designed to Heal podcast, because it always makes me think.
Mm.
You push me to think about things I haven't thought of before. You have some incredible guests on there, not just me and Amy, but some incredible guests on there talking about health and healing. And at the beginning of your podcast, now I think you might have done a new intro recently,
Mm.
but at the beginning of your podcast, you always have this phrase that says that the best doctor lives right inside of you.
Yeah.
And it's basically the idea that our amazing God has created us with these amazing bodies with the ability to heal from sickness, to heal from injury. And as I've listened to your podcast over the years, you've given just examples of that, which have caused me to be just blown away with God's power and creativity. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to have Ben on. Start with
Yeah.
this idea: the best doctor lives right inside of you, and talk about
Yeah.
God's amazing plan for healing in our bodies.
Even just listening to you describe back what you have been, enjoyed about my program, like, it gets me excited because it reminds me of how amazing our God is. Much like maybe you've seen relationships restored with families, or maybe a parent-child relationship restored and redeemed. It gets you excited because you know what's possible. Sometimes we've missed our perspective, especially with the human body. And I often remind people, if you knew how amazing the design and how intricate and how just dynamic and divine it is, I think my position would be that we would have a lot less fear about our body. We would live in less, oh my goodness, what's going on? What's wrong? And at least in the United States, it's become very medicalized, right? I mean, everybody lives in this world. It's labels, it's diagnoses. There's a time and a place for all that. That's not the discussion. But we don't do as much talking about the wonder of God's design. I mean, here we can certainly talk scripturally, the fact that we're created in the likeness and image of God. That statement always just blows my mind, Rob. Like, to think that we are created in the likeness and image of God. Now, listen, I love a sunset. I love a beautiful ocean and trees and all that. But none of those are created in the likeness and image of God. There's something different about us. And then when I start thinking about just the actual physiological things in our body, the fact that we have trillions of cells right now as we're sitting here talking to each other, that our eyeballs are seeing, our ears are hearing, the food that we ate this morning is digesting into, turning into body parts and turning into hormones our body's making, and our body somehow stays at 98.6 degrees plus or minus, even though my temperature in here is 70. And the fact that when I go to bed tonight, my heart will keep beating. It says he watches over us. The fact that he knows the hairs on our head. It's like, how can we not be in endless awe of it? When I was in chiropractic school, one of the things that you do is you work on, cadavers, right? People that have donated their body to science. And I always used to, before I was saved, I had a big fear of death. It was kind of difficult for me. I didn't want to talk about it.
Well, you're supposed to have a fear of death. That's actually
Yeah,
something to drive you to Christ. Keep going.
yeah, I had a paralyzing fear of it. The thought of being around a dead body was very overwhelming to me. I didn't want to do that. But you don't have a choice, and you go in this lab, and it's just like you'd imagine. It's rooms full of these, cases that have bodies in them, and you start. It's the person just like they passed away, and you start this dissection process. Takes about a year and a half. And when we opened up the human body, and I saw the intricate design, I'd seen pictures, I've seen anatomy books and labs. I'd never actually seen it like that, and I just got so overwhelmed in that moment, Rob, where I saw the heart just lies right up against the lungs and touches the diaphragm and the stomach, and it nerves and blood vessels and muscles and ligaments and tendons. And I just thought to myself, in that moment, I just remember being so overwhelmed, like really just uncovering those amazing aspects of the body and how well it works 99.999% of the time.
Let me ask you a question about pain. I think that we live in a society or a culture, there's a mindset that we should never feel pain. You should never feel emotional pain, spiritual pain, physical pain. And I think about the way I work. Okay. So let's say I've got a joint that's hurting me. Well, I'm just going to take ibuprofen. I'm going to take some aspirin. And I know in my head that taking the ibuprofen, I haven't fixed anything. It just makes it go away. And I feel better.
Okay.
Can you talk about that trend, that pattern, and how from like your medical perspective now that pain is not something just to get rid of, but maybe it's pointing us towards seeking some real healing?
One of my favorite books I've ever read is called The Gift of Pain. And it's actually written by Philip Yancey, who you would probably know, right? And then he was, I believe, co-author with Dr. Brand, is a medical doctor. And Dr. Brand is, if I'm remembering this all right, part of his fame was from he worked in Africa and things with leprosy, and he tells these stories about how leprosy in many ways is just it eats away at the nerves, and so you don't feel things. So these disfiguring things as often because they don't know, for example, that they sprained their ankle, they keep walking on it, it gets worse, and he tells these kind of crazy stories about his work down there, and he's really one of the people that destigmatized a lot of what was going on with leprosy. I personally have actually been down there in leprosy colonies. I've adjusted people over there. It's been part of my experience. However, when it comes to pain, it's always, Rob, the body, the wisdom of God in us. He gave us those nerves and those communication for a reason. If your shoulder hurts, I don't want you popping a pill so you don't feel it, and then you go play volleyball or baseball tonight, and it gets worse, and you think, hey, I don't know why my shoulder is getting worse. Well, we're kind of overriding some of the mechanisms that got put in there to protect us or for our own good. Part of the response of the body, there's a wisdom in that pain. So for sure, whenever there's pain, we want to consider it. We don't want to be thinking, hey, let's just get rid of it. All right. If anything has been shown to us these last years with the opioid epidemic and things like that, this almost unquestionable assumption that we must get rid of pain at all costs. I think it goes deeper, Rob, than just physical pain. I think we do this in many ways: emotional pain, spiritual pain, right? We just don't want to feel anymore. And that's part of what God made us human. You said that earlier when I made that statement about fear of death. That emotion that God gave us is actually part of the plan, right? Part of, well, what's going on here? Why do I have that fear? I should have that fear in the sense of, what does that mean? Who created me? What's going on? So I encourage people to not mask pain, to understand the pain than the wisdom of the pain. But also, the last thing I'll say is this: I look at some of these medications mostly because I see so many people that get dependent on them, even over the counter medications. I just ask people to be wise, all right, and do consider A, the side effects of some of these things, and then B, just the action of overriding some of God's wisdom in there. What am I doing? So there's my thoughts.
Well, Ben, in our ministry, we come alongside a lot of families in coaching, care, counseling. Lots of that coaching and care is spiritual, relational, but we're also walking with families through kids' issues at school, kids' issues with homework, with stuff at work, marital conflicts and problems. And I want to have you speak into a couple areas of health issues that a lot of the families in the visionary family world have talked to us about and are navigating and are sometimes confused with. And I'll give a little preamble or disclaimer here. You and I are probably going to talk for about another 10 minutes, and we're going to talk about two incredibly complicated things in 10 minutes. So if everyone could understand that we're just scratching the surface and maybe giving some food for thought, I would definitely encourage you. You can go to Ben's podcast, Designed to Heal. These are subjects that are talked about there. You could find the titles on those podcasts where you could dig deeper. But the first one is I want to talk about, or have you talk to me a little bit about families that are navigating difficult decisions with their kids related to vaccinations. I'm going to give you a little bit about my backstory. I'm a father of 7. Amy kind of plays point on like the medical world for our kids. And Amy would be what I would just call kind of vaccine cautious. So let's say the doctor says, well, your 2-year-old needs these, 8 vaccines right now. She would say, okay, well, I want to get one now and maybe one in 6 months. And so she'd just sort of say like, well, I don't know about getting all 8 at once in a 2-year-old. I don't know if I'm a fan of that. So just sort of cautious. COVID and the COVID vaccine, let's say, increased our cautiousness. Because of the results that we saw with that, because of the marketing we saw with that, because of the direct lies that we saw with that. So that moved us from cautious to extra cautious. And then I was also looking at like some research. I have, teen girls, and they're like, well, your teenage girl needs this vaccine. And so I did some research, and well, if they get this particular sickness, there's a 1 in a million chance they get it. And here are the effects on their life. And if they take the vaccine, there's a 1 in a million chance they're going to have these horrible side effects.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, if there's a 1 in a million chance they get it and they get that stuff, and there's a 1 in a million chance they get it and they get that stuff, why would I put chemicals in my daughter's body?
Yeah.
So can you, and this is sort of a fresh subject for us. We're having grandkids right now. So every time there's a new infant that comes into the world, my children are there asking the question of what vaccines do I get? And I'm not asking you to get into this vaccine good, but how can us maybe young parents just be thinking about or asking questions, researching, talk to their doctors? Like, what's kind of the 101 counsel that you would give?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, it's an emotional. There's a lot of charge in that conversation, right? I've navigated all of that over my own life with my wife, with my in-laws and all that, and having kiddos. And I land then even probably farther than you, Rob. But I also, I don't know for sure. But anyway, my 2 children, 17 and 15, they've never been vaccinated. I share that not as some sort of like badge or anything. I share that just so people know that exists. There's people out there that just say, that doesn't seem to be fit for me. All right. Now, what I don't think is ever a problem is to get more information. Rob, I do this for a living, right? I get to study this stuff. I get to ask these questions. I have a lot of doctors in this world. So if I was a full-time, mortgage banker or teacher, and then on top of this, I've got to try to research the totality of vaccines. Like it's frustrating that we live in a time where it's difficult to trust some of our agencies that we maybe historically were able to trust. CDC, FDA, whatever it is, okay? And so there's questions and concerns around that. So I definitely have compassion for the fact that it's complicated right now, all right? They just released the new updated schedule for children. Honestly, it's appalling. You maybe have a couple of years on me, Rob, but when we were younger, it was like 8 vaccines, okay?
Right.
Now it's upwards of 80 to 90 when you add up all the doses and all that, all right? They've added the COVID vaccine to children as young as 6 in this next one, on the mandatory schedule or the required schedule. So when I look at that, I say, I know that it's a lot. Okay. However, in my world, I've also seen the kids that come in with the injuries. I've seen the kids that come in that parents with regret. And I'm life is life, just like you said with your daughter, right? Hey, there's a 1 in a million here, there's a 1 in a million there. We do know, and it's becoming more known every day, that there's a lot that we were never told. Okay, there's concerns that we have about how these have ever been tested, what that really looked like, what are some of the ingredients in there. I have found that the more people know about it, the more they learn about it, people are generally surprised. Okay, now they may still come to the conclusion that, hey, for me, what I've known and learned, I feel like the risks outweigh the benefit. I would tell people, from my experience, the more people know about it, the more they tend to be concerned, right? And the more that they have some questions about it. I would say this: if you're a person that says, hey, but what about my pediatrician? That's why a lot of times on my show, Rob, I'll bring on a full-blown medical degreed pediatrician, right? And that has maybe a contrarian perspective on this,
Well,
to say, hey,
you have top doctors
yeah.
on your show all the time.
So I say, hey, at least know that there is a medical professional that's come to maybe a similar conclusion to that, what their concerns are, right? And say, hey, no, and there's other ways to do that. And so I would encourage people to get educated. Now I'm just got to put a couple caveats on that, because we used to think that we could, that meant I go to the CDC and I read the website, right? And that would be it. Or I read an insert or something like that. I would say that if anything, over the last few years, we've learned that there might be more to that story. Some of the science that we're getting shared has been not what we hoped it would be. We found out that the science, the way that it made it through there, was not what we assumed. We assumed that it meant that they were honest about that science. We assumed some of those things. So unfortunately, it's a tumultuous time to be making those decisions. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of pressure, social pressure, and trying to get good, solid advice is difficult. Okay, now I would say this, and I'm assuming many of your listeners are people of faith, right? So that is the worldview that we do take this through. So my starting point is much like yours, Rob. I understand that God created me in his likeness and image. I know that he gave me an immune system. I just want people to hear this. I don't walk around with fear that my children are not vaccinated. I don't mean that as like I'm strong or tough or, a better Christian. That's not what I mean at all. And I've read recently some things, at least spend as much time as you would maybe. And again, Rob, you clean this up if I've maybe misspoken or anything for your listeners. But if you're going to go buy a car or buy a home or, get a new, I don't know, right? You're going to spend some time, or your car seat or your crib even, these are things we care about, our strollers, what, ingredients you use in, foods you're eating. A lot of parents are more aware of that.
Yep.
Just please, you won't regret it. You may still come to the same conclusion and say, hey, for me and my family, I feel like this is what we want to do. But at the end of the day, it's between you and God, okay? And between you and your own family. And I would say that last thing I'll say is, and I do mean that, and I know you as a grandfather, I imagine, Rob, even though you're a grandfather, ultimately it's your kiddos' decisions, right? And you will honor them and love them. So even people that feel pressure as the child, ultimately it is the child that God gave you. And you are to raise and steward that kid. And God will give you the wisdom and discernment to do that.
And I've got one more. It's another controversial one. And just to reiterate why I wanted to have these conversations with you, these are real life struggles that families are facing. These are real life conversations I'm having. Even earlier this morning before we recorded the podcast, I'm on a coaching call with the family. These sorts of things are coming up. So rather than just say, well, here at Family Vision, we're a Christian ministry and we're going to teach you how to have family worship time, which we are, how to pray and read the Bible and all that. We want to help your family grow together in every area of your health and help you with your thinking on all these things. Okay, one last one before I wrap us up.
Yeah.
And that has to do with the increase. And in our 30 years of ministry, I especially saw it over my 18 years of youth ministry, the dramatic increase in giving children and teenagers medication for behavioral or emotional stuff. So back when I was growing up, there were some kids that were labeled hyper, okay, and that was usually just a derogatory term, or you're a boy, just a spaz, I guess that's what I was called. But then, that begins to get diagnosed as ADHD or hyperactivity disorder. And now you layer in anxiety disorder, depressive mood disorder. In a lot of families, Christian families, the first thing that the school or the doctor wants to do when a child is dealing with some behavioral or emotional issues, the very first thing they want to do is get them on medication. And in our ministry, and this has been, again, 30 years, we have not taken a like medication's bad, don't ever do it, but a very cautious approach with that, that there may be root issues that are not biological in your child here. Medicine is biology, right? So if you give a child, a biological treatment, you're assuming a biological cause. And one of the questions I've always asked parents, and then I'll let you share about this. I've always asked parents if they're considering any kind of emotional psychotropic medication for a child, always ask the doctor, what is the plan to get my child off this medicine? When does my child get to get off? And if they can't give you a 6-month, 9-month, 12-month game plan, you ought to be really careful. I've had many families, they've asked that question to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, the reality is they may need this the rest of their life. And again, I'm not trying to come at that from I'm not a medical doctor,
Yeah.
pretending to be one here. But I'm coming at that with a lot of concern about giving a child a chemical, saying that because they can't sit still in class or because they're dyslexic or whatever it might be, that we've got to have medication in them for the rest of their life. So can you just, again, I know it's very sensitive and it's very personal. Just love your thoughts on this.
Rob, you and your wife really helped me with a situation that I was walking through with one of my kids. And he was having some, concerns, saying some things that were concerning to us and you love your kiddo and you just want to know. And I don't remember the exact phrase of it, but I know because your wife has a background a little, right, in some of her work previously in mental health children's, right?
Yep. She's a licensed clinical professional counselor. Yes.
Yeah. And I remember her saying like, hey, some version of like, listen, there may be some things you do in the short term to try to, stop the immediate concerns. But her experience was, regardless of that, there's issues that need to be addressed. And those issues could mean a lot of things. Those are very real, right? Those are real struggles. We're not here. I am certainly not here saying, oh, that's not real. You don't have depression. You don't have ADHD. Now, the name is less interesting to me. And I think anybody that's been around a little, we've all seen this increase in diagnoses and labels, and we probably all have concerns about that. So the first thing I'd want a person to know is the research says that it's not chemical imbalances. Okay. So to your point about medication. Now, that does not mean that medications or drugs or chemicals don't have effects. I mean, if I was sitting here and I've got a bottle of water here, if I was drinking that and it was not water, it was alcohol, I can not believe that I'm going to experience the effects of that alcohol on my body.
It is water,
so
right?
It is water. So you can take medications and they can have effects, and we can sometimes, Rob, come to the wrong conclusion. All right. Meaning, hey, this seems to be helping them because they're calmer or they're, I don't sleep. It doesn't matter, right? Fill in the blank for said condition. Okay. Again, what the long-term studies on, and this is the good thing, we've been around long enough. You said you grew up in that generation where kids weren't as medicated. Now we see more medication. There's been a lot of studies that have shown these medications didn't do what we thought they did. Okay. And there as other consequences to those, serious consequences, from cardiovascular risk to effects on the heart to effects on the brain. Here's what I would kind of want people to know, to kind of put it in a bucket for people, is this. There's no long-term studies that show that they deliver on their brand promise. Okay. They don't do what they want us to think that they do. Getting off them is very difficult. So I would think long and hard about getting on them. Okay. And many of these medications, and I would really encourage people to listen to some of my, because this is an area that's very near and dear to my heart with some family members and raising kids. So I've done a lot of episodes around these types of questions, mental health specifically. For example, those types of drugs like Ritalin and ADD medication, those generally fall in the class of, Rob, what this is surprising to you, but really fall very close, or in some cases identical to what we would call meth or methamphetamines. All right.
Stimulant-based.
Here's my point.
Medication.
Stimulant-based. But I mean, none of us, Rob, and this is not a condemning conversation or shaming somebody. If I was very tired, and use this analogy sometimes, I was super tired and I took some cocaine as a pick-me-up and I went out and washed the car and cleaned the house and, get everything. And my wife goes, wow, that was great, honey. Thank you so much. What's up? I said, well, I did a little bit of this amazing thing here, cocaine. Now she'd probably have concerns, right? Now, not right away. I didn't drop over dead, but she might be concerned of the long-term effects. She might be concerned like, well, Ben, you didn't have a lack of cocaine in your body. It wasn't a cocaine deficiency, even though it had effects on me. So we wouldn't want to necessarily, as a first line of defense, say to our children or ourselves, hey, I'm going to give you some meth with your breakfast so you can sit still in class. That's not that was that I don't think anybody really thinks like that. Okay, now just some take homes on this. What I would recommend, and I've seen enough of this with kids in my office, where absolutely take a look at their nutrition. Rob, there's been studies on this, that some of the artificial ingredients and the colorings, the red dyes and things like that, they can have they're considered neurotoxic, but also they're neurostimulant. They can actually make us have behaviors like that. Okay, so if you look at a lot of the traditional, typical, standard American diet, it's actually surprising, Rob, that our kids in some ways aren't sicker. Okay, so I would start with diet. All right, and I would try to clean that up. And am I giving my kids, good, clean, whole food? Now you might say, oh, that seems too simple, or can that really do it? Some of these things, don't be fooled that the simplicity isn't powerful. Okay, don't be surprised that cleaning up a diet, getting them off of technology. You guys do a brilliant job. Many of your episodes I've listened to on that have been a blessing to me, but also I've shared them, because how can we not assume that a child, with the amount of technology that they're exposed to nowadays, the nutritional deficiencies and chemicals that they're around, the sleep schedules that have been changed, other chemicals, our environment. Rob, just those 3 or 4 things alone could give a person what we would describe or be labeled as ADD. You've seen the studies on depression, particularly with adolescent girls, related to the amount of time on social media. No pill will fix that.
Right.
No pill will fix it. And that don't mean that derogatory. That's just logic. Okay.
And
So
we've seen kids
go ahead.
with paralyzing fear and anxiety, that more time with mom and dad has helped calm their spirit, more time with their siblings, make some changes to the schedule, make some changes to the diet, more family prayer and scripture in the home. In other words, the anxiety was being driven by emotional, relational, and heart issues. And so the treatment needed to be emotional, relational, and heart treatment. Ben, do me a favor. You've got so much on your podcast. If you think that this conversation today was interesting, controversial, thought-provoking, the Design to Heal podcast is the place for you. I love it because it just challenges my thinking, challenges me to consider some new things. And again, you come from a Christian faith perspective, so I love that. Tell folks how they can get connected to the podcast.
Our podcast, pretty straightforward. It's Designed to Heal, Dr. Ben Rall. It's on all the major platforms. And I just found out, my wife told me the other day, I guess it does have a searchable database on there, so you can search topics. Okay, so if you are looking, because we've done this for many years, and if you want some vaccine questions or you got mental health issue questions or whatever, you can search it. So I think that's helpful as well, because you know how it gets trying to find episodes sometimes. So that's the best way. I have a website, drbenrall.com. I think our Design to Heal podcast does have an Instagram, if that's something that people are into, but just all the major platforms as far as the podcast goes.
Well, Ben, we're going to put the links to all that in the show notes. The website, Dr. Ben Rall, RALL.com, wealth of information there. Ben, I appreciate you coming on and just helping families navigate through some of this, but also just to be amazed at God's incredible creation of our bodies. And folks, if you want to reach out for some prayer needs for your family, or some of the conversation that we had today sparked a need for you to have further conversation and dialogue or some coaching, just email me directly at podcast@visionaryfam.com, podcast@visionaryfam.com. And if you are not already a part of the Visionary Family community, if you have not already become a Visionary family, we're putting together a community of families around the world, Visionary families. You're like, what's a Visionary family? A Visionary family is just a family that wants to follow Jesus, and they want their kids to follow Jesus. So if you're like, yeah, I want to follow Jesus, I want my kids to follow Jesus, you're a Visionary family. And we want you to join this Visionary family community, because we want to build a personal relationship with you, and we want to walk this journey with you. You go to our website, visionaryfam.com, right up at the top, join the community, learn all about it, join this community of like-minded families, and we would love to walk the journey with you. As always, we're looking forward to our next time together with you on Family Vision.